Welcome to the Atomic Impact Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Osborn. And on this podcast, we interview successful business leaders for them to share their atomic impactful lessons that they've learned throughout the course of running their business and share them with us so that we can learn from them as well. As always, this show is sponsored by the LinkedIn Reverse Podcast Method, the new way established businesses are creating a reliable acquisition channel of conversations with their ideal prospects. We use this method to book 26 qualified leads and sales calls in 10 days without any ad spend, outreach, endless social media posting, or any of the old, ineffective marketing methods that people just don't like anymore. To find out more, try to message me on LinkedIn to have a chat. That's Jason A. Osborn. The link to that will be in the show notes below. On today's show, our special guest is Charles McLachlan. He is the owner of Transformation Development Partnership, where he's helping CEOs and senior executives to make the most of the opportunities provided by the growth in the fractional leadership ecosystem. So, Charles, thanks so much for being on the show today. And I want to start off with asking you a question that I always love to start off with, which is this. If you somehow were able to go back in time when you started your very first business, or maybe even this one currently that you're running, but knowing what you know now, what would you do different in the first 12 months?
Well, I think at one level, I wouldn't do anything different because for me, I have loved learning by getting things wrong and then getting things right. So I'm a very experiential learner. I did do a university degree, but after that, going back to study wasn't for me. So I love learning by trying things out, by doing lots of small experiments, by doing some quite big experiments, and then what works and what doesn't work. So in some ways, I'm somebody who lives without regrets. And perhaps that's the most powerful thing that I've learned. Don't live in a world of regrets about what could have been or what might have been. Pick up with what's happened, take the lessons, move on, and teach those as assets for your future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. I mean, if someone were asking me the question, I would probably give something similar. It's like, well, I don't know if I would change anything different because I wouldn't have learned the lessons that I would have learned. So let me ask you the question a little bit different way. Let's say someone was asking you and you were reflecting back on what you would advise them to do differently than maybe you had done to maybe not encounter some of the hurdles or obstacles that you did encounter. What's some advice around that?
Well, I think what I would have said to people 5 years ago is build the right support team. So even if you are starting out on your own, which I wouldn't recommend, at least have a support team around you, people who believe in you, who will encourage you, the network that will do you favors, places where you can exchange your time for other people's time. That social capital, if you like, is probably the most powerful asset you can have right at the beginning. And so making sure that you are looking after those relationships, you're building those relationships and you're making the most of them. But I would also suggest that if you look at many of the most significant business leaders, you have the front man and you have the sidekick. And actually, the sidekick often is the engine of that business. The front man is great in terms of building the brand and so on. And whether it's Bill Gates or any other people in the current era, there is the front man, and then there is the powerhouse who actually gets things done, holds things together. So for many founders, I think finding that yin to their yang, finding that person who's going to cover their shadow side is really important. And so if it's only going to be two of you, then find that other person. But I think a triplet is probably the right answer because you've got the visionary leader, and then you might have the expert executioner, but then you often need somebody who's going to act as the connector, the bridge between those two, somebody who's going to look after that relationship. And the difficulty can happen when the visionary leader and the person who builds stuff just can no longer relate to each other. So often having that third person is vital to a startup.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's really good advice. Well, as you have grown in your own business, Charles, what's been one of the hardest parts of scaling and growing without coming across in your business as being spammy or salesy in your approach? I know a lot of companies face that challenge as they're growing. What are some things that you've done to steer away from that?
Well, I've had a series of businesses over time, and I suppose what I've been doing most recently is building a business which to a large extent relies upon my personal brand. And building that personal brand over time has been quite a slow process, has required me to think about myself in a different kind of way, and to be absolutely consistent about what are the values I want to bring to the table and what are the stories that I think are most important for my potential clients. So that's probably what has allowed things not to be spammy. If people don't like what I've got to say, or if what I've got to say is not relevant to them, then they may see that as spam, but at least they're always going to get the same spam, and then they can turn it off quite quickly. I think the things that I struggle with are the people who every 3 to 6 months jump on the next bandwagon, and they don't give me confidence. And I've tended to build my own personal brand by evolution over time. So I've been working with founder CEOs for more than 20 years now. And then the portfolio executive, this engagement with the fractional ecosystem, been doing that for about 10 years, before fractional was the thing that everybody was talking about in the last 2 or 3 years. So I've had an opportunity to sort of build a position, have a view of this world, and consistently talk about what I feel really matters to the people I work with. And for those who it doesn't matter, surprise, surprise, they don't work with me.
Yeah. And I love what you said at the beginning there as well, where for those people that may not agree with what you're saying or just don't like what you're getting, they may perceive that as being spam, but then they can just unsubscribe and leave the emails or however you're communicating with them on your social media, whatever. And I think that's the key thing is some people just aren't going to resonate. That doesn't mean you're spammy. But there are definitely spammy approaches and techniques that people are using that do come across that way. So I think that's a really key distinction for sure. Well, you've talked about building your network and things like that. What's been one of the things that you've changed recently, let's say over the last several years, on how you're building relationships that make the process of generating clients easier for you than maybe that you were doing, 5 or 10 years ago?
Well, I suppose my current strategy has been operating for 7 or 8 years, and it's a content first strategy. So initially on LinkedIn, and then I tried Instagram, I tried Facebook, I even tried TikTok. And I still have a presence on those channels, but recently I've adopted Substack as a context in which you can create long form content, and we'll see where that goes. But fundamentally, the view I've taken is that stuff I put out on my feed needs to be valuable content. And then if people connect to me, or if I connect to them, then it's in the direct messaging that I might bring them an offer, an opportunity for them to engage further. So I've taken that view. I know it's not what everybody does, but very much said content first. It's got to be valuable. It's got to be meaningful. It's got to be aligned to the things I believe. And then if people start to feel they know me, if people start to like who they think I am or the kinds of things I'm involved with, then when I approach them through direct messaging, then they should already have some resonance and I'll get better traction. And what has really worked for me with that approach is 2 things have started to happen. One is I get unsolicited approaches from people who've been, I call it lurking, for 2 or 3 years, looking at my content, and then they put their hand up and say, Charles, can we talk? And that's very encouraging. And it does show the slow burn. But the second thing that's happened is that the price point where people don't blink has probably increased by a factor of 3 or 4. So this long, slow building of a personal brand consistently out there has enabled me to bill my time, and it's probably my time that I bill at a premium rate, and I get braver and braver about that rate.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. Love that. So it's the content side, building the brand long term, and I think that's a big thing that people don't understand is the long term approach. And I love that you've emphasized that so strongly. I think a lot of people think I'm just going to put some content up there, it's going to blow up, go viral, and everyone's going to start knowing who I am. And I agree with you. I think I always tell people do it, absolutely put content out there, but realize it is a long term. It's a long burn that you have to do, but you've got to start that at some point. So I love that. I think that's really, really important. One of the things that I like to chat about as well, Charles, is we all go through challenges in business. We all have them. It's just a part of it. And oftentimes we can feel like we're the only ones that are going through it, or, is there something wrong, particularly with me? No one else goes through this sort of stuff. And so I like to normalize that a bit more because we all go through it. And I think as we talk about those things, it just helps people realize, okay, we're all going through different stuff at different times. So having said that, what's the biggest challenge that you have faced at any point in your business? And that could be sales, marketing, organizationally, interpersonal, anything at all. What's the biggest challenge that you've faced in your business so far? And what's the lesson that you've learned from that?
Yeah, well, going back quite a long way, I started a business with another guy. He had the majority shareholding. I was the CTO, he was the CEO. And we built this business up over about 5 years. We had 50 people working with us. And two things happened, which were big lessons for me. One was he decided he wanted to shift from a technical services business, software development services business, to a product business without understanding any of the dynamics that would have on the business. And the second thing is, as an individual, he couldn't cope with an organization that had more people than he could directly control. So having invested 5 years of my life building this business, he made the decision to put the company into voluntary liquidation just at the point that I'd find a buyer for the product we've been building over the last 2 years, an established software house which was prepared to pay what in those days felt a very large amount of money, and would also take me on in the transition. But because he was in control as the majority shareholder, I wasn't able to make that transaction happen. And so I think the two big lessons for me were the partner you pick really, really matters. And you probably aren't going to know whether they're the right partner for you or not until quite a long way down the journey. So you need to make sure you plan on how you can make a clean exit and still retain some of the value you've created together. And the second thing is that just because you're being successful with one business model, don't imagine that it's going to fund another one, which is radically different in its dynamic. And I see lots and lots of people who want to take a consulting business and turn it into a software product business. And they are very naive about the financial dynamics and the implications for how that business will work. So that was a really painful lesson. I ended up, in essence, working for 5 years for nothing. But the learning were invaluable, and I'll be able to carry those into my future. There's one other thing I would say is, in retrospect, I realized that loss was something I should have recognized was like grief. I think we can forget that this kind of disappointment, this kind of loss is actually an experience which is best understood through the lens of grief. And any of you who have looked into how grief works, it talks very clearly about the stages of grief. And I was surprised that for a year after this came to an end, I was pretty ineffective.
Mm.
And what that really was a process of grief. And yes, I managed to go and get a job earning enough money to keep our heads above water, but grief was the thing that was going on. And I think we pretend to ourselves that it's all right, really. But if we process it as a grieving experience, then that journey makes sense.
Mm. I think that's a very, very powerful thing you just said there, Charles. I think people miss that point a lot, and I think there's a lot of stuff in life that deals with grief that people don't deal with, and then wonder why they're struggling so much. So thank you for that, being open and honest, and just so transparent with it. I think that's really, really helpful. So, well, over the next 2 to 3 years of your business, what are your goals? What are you looking to achieve?
Well, I believe that there is a huge need for individuals in the second half of their working life to find a way of continuing to earn money, to do things that are rewarding and enjoyable. And whereas perhaps when I went to university, the promise was, get a proper job with a big company and then you'll be able to retire in your late 50s, perhaps with a big enough pension, you never have to work again. That's just absolutely not true anymore. And so I'm talking to more and more people who, one, can't afford to retire, and two, recognize that just in terms of their overall lifestyle, not doing something that's rewarding and engaging in the workplace, even if it's on a part-time basis, will bring their lives to an end sooner and often damage their most important relationships. So finding a way to create a powerful taper where you move from working 60 hours a week to a work style where perhaps you're fee earning 12 days a month. And yeah, you've got some other things you need to do to make your life work, but you've got longevity. You're belonging to four or five or six organizations, and you are engaging with those organizations on a 4 or 5 or 6 years time span. That insulates the portfolio effect, insulates from the dependence on a single employer, but also gives you the variety that people crave. And finally, because you're working for smaller organizations, actually they'll value your corporate career in a way that large corporates no longer do when you hit that magic age of 50 plus.
Mm.
So I
Yeah.
want to do more and more of that. I want to help more and more people take control of their working lives. I want more and more people to see work as a place of freedom and joy rather than slavery and toil. And for me, I want more and more founders to have access to people who've got 20 or 30 years experience, which I call wisdom workers, rather than people who just can rely on AI, which will only regurgitate whatever it's consumed.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love your goal with that as well, Charles. Well, for people that are looking to get in touch with you and learn a little bit more about what you do, maybe how you can help them out, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Well, the simplest thing to do is just to look at the website portfolioexecutive.biz. And you'll see a video of me there, so you know you've got to the right place. There is a contact form. There's lots of content there. Or connect with me on LinkedIn, Charles McLachlan on LinkedIn. And it would just be great to get to know you a little bit. It'd be great to see whether the things that you care about are things I care about. And it would be great to see whether, yeah, you could have a whole new life in the second half of your career.
Love that. Love that. Well, I definitely recommend everyone checking out Charles on both those places. So I didn't say this earlier, but I've actually known Charles for several years. And I can definitely recommend him. And yeah, you're in trusted hands if you do end up working with Charles. So Charles, thanks so much for being on the show. Been a great pleasure for you being here and just sharing your wisdom over the years that you've been in business. So thank you so much for that. And as a reminder, everyone listening, this show is sponsored by the LinkedIn Reverse Podcast Method, the new way established businesses are creating a reliable acquisition channel of conversations with their ideal prospects that doesn't rely on any of the old, traditional, ineffective methods that everybody starting to hate. So to find out more, direct message me on LinkedIn. Have a chat. That's Jason A. Osborn on LinkedIn. The link to that will be in the show notes below. And until next episode, stay inspired.